Right, let's get into our panel discussion for this evening. So concerns have been raised about admitting undocumented foreign children to South African schools as part of the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act. And a part of the act ensure that no child is turned away from a classroom due to a lack of documentation. Now, some groups, like Operation Dudula, say they'll be deploying members across the country in a bid to ensure that children of foreign nationals are not admitted before South African learners. But for more on this, we are joined in studio by Sadtu General Secretary, Dr Mugwena Maluleke. We also have, as part of our panel, those who join us via video link. We're joined by the African Diaspora Global Network CEO, Dr Vusumuzi Sibanda, Operation Dudula's President, Zandile Dabula. We have also with us the Governing Body Foundation's Dr Anthea Cereseto and Basic Education spokesperson Elijah Mhlanga joining us. Also to give us some perspective from the side of the Department of Basic Education. And I think naturally, Elijah, it only makes sense that we start with you, right, and talk about this particular provision in the BELA Act, what it seeks to achieve and why it's important. And also, I suppose, the lessons that we've learned from the department prior to where we are right now in terms of why this was important. I think about concerns that were raised with the DG of the department towards the end of last year around some unable to write their NSCs because of a lack of documentation.
Yeah, good evening, lady. Good evening to all the colleagues on the line this evening. Let me start by saying that some of the provisions in the BELA Act, lady, were not created anew. They are actually outcomes of court judgments that have affected the department and the work that it does. And that includes the admission policy as well. So what you are referring to as being in the BELA Act is actually a result of a Bishop High Court judgment of December 2019, which instructed the department to admit learners even if they didn't have documentation. So the department has been doing so from 2020 up until now, but we felt that we needed to put together all the court judgments that were affecting the work of the department and make them legislation, that is to bring them together into one document. And they therefore became part of what we now call the BELA Act, but in fact it goes into the South African Schools Act for implementation. So it's not something that is new in terms of it being in the BELA Act. It's something that was long time coming because a High Court judgment made an order in this regard. So we needed to comply with it and legislate it so that it doesn't just remain a standalone court ruling somewhere. It needed to be part of the mainstream legislation that the department uses for governance in schools.
Yeah, and Dr. Sibanda, this is where I bring you in, really then saying as part of the mainstream legislating of how we deal with education, as you hear from Elijah Mhlanga there, children of undocumented foreign nationals will not be required to produce documentation to be admitted into schools. A step in the right direction, I imagine, is your position on this.
Well, look, yes, precisely. So I think like what Mr. Mhlanga has just said, that this is basically born out of the Center for Child Law, versus the Minister of Basic Education in 2017 decided in 2019. And also it is premised on the Constitution, sections 28 and 29, that deals with the rights of the children and the right to education. So, I mean, we then had further discussions, of course, with the then Minister of Home Affairs in 2019, including, the then Minister of Basic Education, where it was basically agreed that the issue of documentation should not be an issue that affects, the admission of children at school, but in fact, it should be an issue that should be dealt with by parents so that, the school should continuously ensure that they facilitate and assist and encourage parents to apply documentation for the children, but they should never be excluded, from school. So it's basically international law, the rights, because the law talks about the best interest of a child. So any exclusion, of a child from, education is not in the best interest of a child and therefore becomes unlawful. I mean, I think it's a general accepted, piece of legislation and law, the world over.
Yeah, Dr. Sibanda, they're saying it's a generally accepted piece of law, and Operation Dudula saying that you don't agree with this piece of legislation. In fact, you're going as far as saying that you're going to be sending your members across the country to schools to prevent children of foreign nationals to be admitted. Give us your position.
So how do you want to give rights to a person who is undocumented? Now, firstly, this is a deliberate, systematic strategy to further undermine the immigration laws of this country and, undermining the citizens of this country. Now, the parents of these children are undocumented. That's the same reason why they do not have proper documentations to be admitted at these schools. What is this bill saying? Is it saying that they're going to document these kids and make sure that they are documented whilst they are in this country? It's not fair for our kids, because it means our own country is not prioritizing South Africans. I mean, we already have a crisis at schools where you have South African kids who cannot be admitted at schools because the schools are already flooded with foreign nationals. I mean, we don't hate these kids, but their parents are undocumented. They are criminals. That's how we call them, because if you're not documented and you are in this country, it means you do not respect the laws of this country, and then it makes you a criminal because you came here illegally, and now you want your child to be educated here in South Africa. Yes, we do understand that every child has a right to be educated, but they need to be educated in a proper manner and not just in here. We've seen how many ladies from Zimbabwe jump the border to just give birth here in South Africa so that their kids can be given South African citizens. It's not fair for us as South Africans, and it should not happen. We're going to make sure as Operation Dudula that we stop this BELA Act. If it's going to disadvantage our South African kids, then it's not going to work for us. And unfortunately, we're going to fight hard and make sure that our own South Africans are prioritized, because it's really undermining.
So just to make clear though, Zandile, you are going to deploy your members to schools to prevent children of foreign nationals from registering. You're going to do that?
Yes, we have been doing that for the past 2 years, because we have been, even now, we're sitting with a long list of parents who are saying that their kids have not been accepted at specific schools, even though they have made sure that they've submitted documents that have been asked from them. They've submitted all the documents. They've applied on time. And we know, like your likes of, I'm going to make an example of a place in Rosettenville. There's a place in Rosettenville in Johannesburg where we know that the population there, over 80% of the people living there are foreign nationals. Now, a South African parent goes and applies at that school, and they're told that they don't have space for admission. But we all know that most of the children that are there, that have been admitted at those schools, are foreign nationals. So we're not going to allow that. We need to make sure, the government of this country needs to make sure that they prioritize our own children. Our own children cannot be educated whilst foreign national children are being educated. I mean, we've seen all these fraudulent documents, how they go to the police station and go write affidavits to say that they're living in the area whilst they're not. So there's a whole lot of loopholes in the system, especially when it comes to the system of education. So it's unfortunate that we don't have the Minister of Education, of the basic education here, because there's definitely some answers that we would have loved to get especially from this BELA bill of theirs that's not prioritizing our own children as South Africans.
Yeah, let's start hearing from the role players that are in the sector, and I think that's going to be really important, because you raised the issue around, well, perhaps there's a capacity issue, and we do have Dr. Cereseto and Dr. Maluleke. Perhaps, Dr. Cereseto, we can start with you. This legislation, as we see it, as part of the BELA Act, one could argue that, the horse is already bolted. The bill is now an act. We're at the point where we need to be enforcing it. But are there concerns then around capacity and implementation?
Yes, good evening. So it's not new, and this is really, really important. In fact, the Constitution is not new, and the court judgments have, in fact, base their argument on the Constitution and the rights of children to basic education, which is an immediately realizable right. And that applies to everyone who is in the country, or the right. So it's old, it's years old. What has caused the problem has been the lack of capacity, because that has increased the tension around this matter. And I can understand frustrations of parents who believe that they're being disadvantaged. And that's why we do, in fact, have the admission system that operates in Gauteng currently in order to regulate admissions. But it does mean, because the law says that it's applicable to all children, doesn't matter the status, they are supposed to have the right visas and permits and so on, but they cannot be prevented from entering the school and being enrolled because they can't produce those documents. The school is obliged to inform parents of what must be done, and all the good schools will help the parents make sure that they go and access the correct method of applying and the correct visas that are required for them, and do some follow-up so that it is actually done, so that we do get the learners documented who qualify, the asylum seekers, for instance. The migrants who are here for work opportunities, who may be more problematic in the eyes of some people, also do have the right. And although the BELA prescribes what documents should be produced, it then, in the actual amendments itself, mentions that even without the documents, the schools must admit. So schools are not the immigration authority. So we have to rely on immigration to do its job, and it is doing its job, because we are aware where immigration officials have come with the parents of illegal people about to deport people, and they've come to collect the children because families have to be deported together. So there is some movement in order to make sure that people who have the right visas do have the access, and that we start to control the numbers of people who have entered illegally and haven't made their status legitimate. So I understand the frustration, capacity, but we as an organization do have to tell our schools, this is the law, you have to admit, you have to make a plan, and the school's admission process needs to be aware that they cannot withhold places. How they're allocated in other provinces is more problematic. In Gauteng, there is the online system. In other provinces, it has become more difficult because there is a degree of selection, and maybe they will choose South Africans first, and that could also be problematic. Because all children have that right.
Because the issue of allocation then raises the question of whether or not we're going to then start seeing prioritization, which could lead to some some arguing that we're seeing an infringement of rights. But I want to bring it into the studio here. Dr. Cereseto talking about how we need to communicate to schools, but this is the policy. This is what needs to be implemented, and the question, of course, is the concerns around how. Here's the issue, though, Dr. Maluleke, is we already have been having conversations in the past few weeks, certainly months, about budget cuts in the education sector, teachers losing their jobs. It's been a big issue in the Western Cape, for instance, which means, as some have argued, is that we've got bigger classrooms. Can we afford to do this?
Well, thanks for having us indeed. I want to agree with Cereseto on the basis that the law is the law, and it didn't start with the BELA Act, as Elijah was explaining. The BELA Act was just to bring together all the court orders that the department had to implement, and one of them is this one. But it starts from Section 29 of the Constitution. Cereseto puts it very clearly: it is immediately realizable. which means that you cannot discriminate against the child on the basis that, one, they don't have documentation, that you are progressively going to attain documents and so forth. So you've got to grant the child space and admit that particular child at school, and then you can then work with the parents to deal with this particular situation. Of course, there are challenges. And we need to appreciate the fact that many parents are affected by this, because the implication of this particular court order, as well as the Constitution, is that there must be resources. And because of Section 29, it doesn't mean you can wait for the resources. But the department has got to understand and interpret that Section 29 very clear, that there must be space for this particular learner who is going to be admitted. There must be resources in terms of the teachers. So you cannot afford, therefore, to retrench teachers when you are going to be having these overcrowding, which has got to be attended to in terms of classes, in terms of human resources, the teachers, not only the teachers, but we've got to also address one of the fundamental issues around this particular admission, because it is going to affect them mentally. Because obviously when Dudula is going to be in that particular school, and even if this particular learner is going to be admitted eventually, it is going to affect them mentally, and the teachers are going to have to deal with that particular problem of the child having been discriminated first and foremost, but obviously shown violence if there's going to be violence, because there's going to be, we see it every year in our schools, and therefore we need to be ready with the Department of Education and say, we need psychosocial services, we need to stop this retrenchment, we need to stop these budget cuts. And I think Cereseto will agree with me, and Mhlanga will agree with me, if education is immediately realizable, that it means, therefore, we need to stop any other thing and make sure that we attend to education. So you can't have these austerity measures in education. We have said to the minister, march with us as Sadtu. Let's go to the Minister of Finance, because unfortunately, you don't have any space to go and start negotiating how you implement it, whether you're going to postpone. You can't postpone. It has to be implemented now.
Dr. Maluleke, paint a picture for me, because you represent as Sadtu the teachers, right? When we say, well, this is the admission policy, it's nothing new, that we're just bringing it, as Elijah said, into mainstream legislating, and then you talk about the psychological impact of having Dudula at the gate. I'm more interested in what happens in the classroom. What is the average size of our classrooms? How are our teachers coping? And is this a concern as to a bulging classroom size? So if you were to paint me a picture of what you're hearing from the teachers on the ground.
Yeah, from the teachers, clearly is that the classes are overcrowded. An average size in a primary school is supposed to be 1:40. But now we're talking about 1:70. In Limpopo, it's more than 1:150 in some of the schools, especially in the secondary
so to
school.
clarify, one teacher to 150 learners?
115 learners in the class in Limpopo and Khamatlala. So you have that particular situation because they don't have enough classrooms. And therefore, they have to admit all the children. They can't discriminate them. They cannot say that the school is full, and it happens. So in secondary schools, it's 1:35. So if you have grade 9, 115 children in a classroom, it means you cannot walk to teach. You have got to teach from the door. And therefore, each and every learner there must be able to understand what you are saying. These are the things that we're confronted with at the end of the day, and they have got to be addressed. They can't be addressed by austerity measures. You cannot have budget cuts in education unless you don't understand the impact that it's going to have to our economy, to our social cohesion in our country, for our stability in the country. Education is a catalyst, it's an enabler. If we don't attend to it, we're going to have crime. We're going to have a huge budget for our health and so forth. So I wish Elijah can take the message and say to the minister, and the Minister of Finance in particular, stop budget cuts. Okay.
Yeah, I wanna quickly just open up the lines, because we're taking your calls and thoughts on this one on WhatsApp. Get in touch with us, 072-110-5584 to send us a WhatsApp. You're more than welcome to give us a call as well to be part of this discussion, 010-594-6010. What is the massive concern really around the concern around having learners admitted into schools and not being required to produce documentation, particularly when we start talking about learners that are undocumented foreign nationals. We've got one WhatsApp already that's come in. I'm going to read just one, and then we need to obviously give the podium to Elijah Mhlanga. BELA Act should be implemented in its entirety. It will help with integration and development of our education system. Vusumuzi Maswabi with that one. Elijah, so Vusumuzi agreeing that the implementation must take place, and I think many of our panelists here saying the same thing, perhaps with the exception of Zandile, but capacity, budget cuts, teachers losing their jobs. In one community, one teacher teaching, dealing the ratio of one teacher to 150 learners. In some cases, 1 to 70 learners. Those are big numbers. And then we're also saying the doors are open despite your documentation. Why is the ratio seemingly not balancing here, Elijah?
Well, Naledi, there's a whole host of reasons why that is the case. One of them is the migration that we are seeing from within the country itself, with people moving from one province to another. In a province, moving from one part to the cities, where they live in and around the inner city, which is near job opportunities, and therefore their children also wanting to go to schools near where they live. That's the one. The second one is people coming from other countries into South Africa and landing in the big cities such as ours. But there are two things that I want to raise. The first one is that when a child comes without an ID, you don't know when they were born, where they come from, you don't know whether they were in school or not. So it becomes a problem when it comes to placing them, because you don't know how old they are and which grade would be suitable for them. So there are some educational problems as well that we need to deal with as a system. So that's just the one. But let me bring it to the individual. We have many learners that go through to matric and pass without having an ID. And when they leave matric, there is no ID number on their certificate, which means they cannot access any services in South Africa because they don't have an ID. And the reason why this happens is that once a child is admitted to a school without an ID, their parents, they don't follow up on getting their children documented, which means this child will finish school without an ID document, which will help them to access services, not just public services, but also in the private sector. No one will give you a bank account if you don't have an ID. No one will give you a medical aid or anything for that matter if you cannot produce an ID. So this is an unexpected outcome of this particular provision. While it is noble, it presents challenges, first for the system in basic education, and second for the individual. We've come across many children who have obtained 8 distinctions or more. They are brilliant in the class, they were appropriately placed, and they are coping academically, but they cannot even get a bursary because the basic requirements that they need to fulfill before they are given such services, they are not able to meet. So what I'm doing here is to explain to the parents that, yes, the law allows your child to come into the education system without an ID, but let's also think about the implications. It shouldn't end there. The one part is sorted out in terms of access, being guaranteed in terms of the law. But what then happens in the life of that child? We also need to talk about that.
So that documentation does need to eventually, be there. And we heard from Dr. Cereseto also talking about how schools have somewhat of a role to play in assisting with that documentation, but is there capacity for that as well? We're going to get more answers, but let's take calls as well. 010-594-6010. Dabula's on the line in Potchefstroom. Dabula, good evening. Thank you for calling.
Hi, guys. South Africa's own time is disheartening. And that's why there's unions like Sadtu that are useless in this country. There's only one person on that panel who's talking sense, and is that Dudula League. How is it possible? Make sense of how is it possible for you to have your own people not have space to be able to go to school, but you have undocumented. And then you have this, and that's what I hate about news channels. They'll have panels, and they'll have one person who will be talking sense. You have your Sibanda there, Dr. Sibanda, who was exposed by Dr. Mugwena that he came here illegally. Why do you still have these kind of people coming to these shows? That Sadtu guy, he's useless. That's why these unions are useless. So they're not even going to fight this. That's why this BELA Act, it's just that we as blacks, we were against it because the people who were fighting it were African people. But the details of it, we didn't know. Like there's this regulation that is being bandied about here. That Sadtu guy must be the one championing with the Dudula people to fight this thing. But he's sitting here and agreeing with this ridiculous thing. You have Sibanda there, useless, he shouldn't be here. The one person who's making sense is that Dudula lady there.
Yeah, Dabula, I really appreciate it. And I should say this, right? Your point is taken, and every opinion is welcome, of course, without a doubt. But it is important that we get all the different voices. And so this is really what we've tried to do, is bring you the teachers, the SGBs, the department, Dudula itself, as well as organizations representing those that come out from outside of our borders. And so it is about diversity of voices. But thank you so much for calling in. Anonymous is in Bronkhorstspruit. Anonymous, good evening. Anonymous, are you there? Good evening.
We would like to greet the panel there and also the viewers. Well, my point on this issue is very simple, because as it stands, the inequality of our country is very high. We are seeing the influx of foreigners coming into our country, and obviously, who's going to be not benefiting from this whole thing is the poor black person, from the one who can afford to pay fees from the private schools. Because what we are seeing is the elite or the capitalists, the people who have the money, moving their child to private schools, and obviously the high number of the people that will be.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes, I'm listening to you. Just do round up your thought for us, Anonymous, please.
Oh, okay. So now, this issue, what's going to happen now is that the schools that the Sadtu president was saying, there will be a huge number of influx of people going to the public schools, which is going to leave again all of those black child with not quality education. So for me, it's just another egg on the face of the black person.
Thank you so much for calling in, Anonymous in Bronkhorstspruit. And some WhatsApps have come through as well. Let's take a look at those messages that have come in from our viewers this evening. Melari Chomazi says, good day. I have been waiting since 2015 for my son's permit. Imagine keeping a receipt for that long. If I track, it says received by Home Affairs only November 2023. My question is, where was the paperwork sitting? So it's not like foreigners don't want to document their kids. I followed all the processes. Mallory, thank you so much for that. And this is why this conversation also needs to speak about the synergy between the Department of Home Affairs as well as the Department of Basic Education. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, let's talk about the implementation. The Act is already in place. What do we need to do to make sure that everybody has what they need to be able to implement it? We'll get into that on the other side of this short break. Stay with us. We continue with our discussion here on Newsfeed PM, the late edition with myself, Naledi Malone. We're talking about a period that is going to get us all talking, in fact, for the next few weeks as learners get ready to go into the classrooms. One issue has been raised by Operation Dudula that says that they will be heading to schools across the country to ensure that children of undocumented learners are prevented from registering in our schools, as is legislated even in the BELA Act. But we're still taking calls on this one and WhatsApp, 072-110-5584, or give us a call, 010-594-6010. A few WhatsApps. Let's take a look at perhaps two. Tinyiko says, BELA Act, it's a good legislation, but admitting undocumented learners will lead to more crowding. Hence, the government is cutting educators' posts. So next, the government is going to allow everyone to cast a vote irrespective of being non-South African. Tinyiko, with that one, Robert says, good evening. The untimely implementation of the BELA Act may create confusion regarding roles and responsibilities, hindering the SGB's ability to function optimally and make impactful decisions. Robert, and that's something that we will then share and get a response for you from Dr. Cereseto. Sipho is in Soweto. Sipho, good evening. Thanks for calling. Okay, Sipho's not there at the moment. Zandile, I want to get to you because obviously you've said that this is what you're going to do. And one of the things that has been raised by our panelists this evening is the issue of allocation, certainly perhaps even prioritization and what that looks like. And, you know, there is the question of the admission of undocumented foreign national children. Does it mean that South African children will not be educated? So what is it that you want to see? When you get to some of these schools where you've deployed your members, what is the instruction?
Now, Naledi, before I get into that, now I'd like to say that, you know, we have undocumented migrants who like to play victims here in this country. Some of them claim to be asylum seekers. Now one needs to understand what is it when you say you're an asylum seeker. It means there probably should be war in your country or you're running away from, you know, hectic stuff. But all of these people that are claiming to be asylum seekers, they're not actually here to seek asylum, but they're here to do businesses. Some of them are running tuck shops, some of them are working and all that. Now, they like to play victim, and it cannot be correct that our own children will not be prioritized in these schools. So this in their countries, why don't they go back to their countries and fix the problems that they have? Now, Elijah is talking about undocumented children that will definitely be allocated in these schools. What I know is that we also have South African children who have identification problems. You know, there's a kid that we once helped as Operation Dudula because she couldn't complete her matric because her identity has been stolen by a foreign national. Those are one issue. Those are some of the issues that we are facing as South Africans. Those are the children that are supposed to be taken care of by this so-called BELA bill. You know, if Elijah is going to be talking about South African children that are undocumented, but yes, they need to make sure that they are allocated in schools, it's correct. But you can't say that you want to allocate a child of an undocumented parent, an undocumented migrant child, to be allocated at a school, whilst we have a long list of awaiting children that are waiting to be allocated in those schools. And we know for a fact that these people are well connected in these schools. I can tell you for a fact that a school at the Mondio High School, where you have children that can easily access school while you have your own South African child that cannot access these schools.
Okay.
And it's problematic because it's forcing teachers to, they can't have a capacity. They don't even have capacity to teach these children. And we will always fight for these teachers because they are complaining. They've been crying out to say that it's not fair for them to be teaching more than 45 children in a class because the schools are just flooded by foreign nationals. It's not even fair for them. So we will keep also supporting the students because we can see that the unions, they pay these monthly fees.
But Zandile, I need to bring you back. Apologies. I need to bring you back because the question that I asked is when you get to these schools, what is the instruction to your members? What do they do when they get there?
So the instruction to the members is that we're going to make sure that if we're going to, we do communicate with the principals at schools to say that we don't want undocumented migrants because they are criminals as is. So why do you have to be entertaining them? But what we will do is that we will keep blocking foreign nationals to access these schools. We will be there. We know them. We do communicate with them. And someone would say that we judge them by how they look, but that's not the point. But you know how in any instance, when they see Operation Dudula picketing in those gates, they don't even come here.
Okay. Yeah.
And that also helps our own South Africans because their workload decreases at those times.
All right, great. Let's take calls. Sipo's in Soweto. Sipo, good evening.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for calling. What are your thoughts?
Yes, man. From the community level, we are from the civil movements.
Mm-hmm.
And we applaud what Dudula is doing every year. And now it's unfair for our South African kids, to be left out. Every year it's a stress, actually. We are on the ground every time. We are in support of Operation Dudula. And then if now they forced us to, accept the undocumented, you are saying we accept the criminals. Because when you're undocumented, you are saying simply means you just cross the border without having a proper document. So why South Africa is so easy target, In their countries, there's no such things like this. This is a banana republic. And truly speaking, we have put leaders there that are sellouts actually for our South African. I will just blatantly state it clear like it is. Every time we are struggling, and this time around, we are going to mobilize each and every civic movement across so that we stop this nonsense. Thank you.
Sipho, thank you for calling. Max is also on the line. Max, tell us where you're calling from and good evening to you.
Evening, Naledi. I'm also on the line. I agree 100% with Sipho who just phoned right now. Ne? Actually, the lady there of Dudula, she's doing excellent job. Excellent. She's for presidency. South Africa has got a big mistake. I don't know whether they call themselves Father Christmas. You can't please the whole world. You can't please. The other speaker told us that those people are undocumented. That means he came to the country illegally. But you sit with people of union, people of the so-called MEC for education and so forth. This guy, other guy who's from Zimbabwe, Sibanda, I'm not against her, but he always defends the undefensible thing. Remember, South Africa is going to look like America. Donald Trump won the election because of this undocumented. So here in South Africa, it's fashionable to bring all this. We can't afford to feed the whole world. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for calling in, Max. Let's start getting into the resolutions here, because obviously there needs to be a way forward. And many of our panelists have said the act is in place; it has to be implemented. The question becomes how. And Dr. Sibanda, I'm going to let you get in your thoughts here. Zandile says Dudula will be at the schools. They will be ensuring the children of undocumented foreign nationals are not registered. Is the issue here prioritization? What is the way forward that you see so that there's synergy, there's implementation, and perhaps even your own constituency feels served?
Well, thank you very much. Look, I think the important thing is basically to realize that there is no issue of prioritizing undocumented or foreign children over South Africans. All children are being prioritized as long as they're in the country in terms of the Constitution. This is not a new piece of legislation. It has been there since the dawn of the Constitution. And what Zandile is saying when she says that people come from either Zimbabwe to give birth in South Africa so that the children should have citizenship, clearly shows that she doesn't understand what she's talking about, because South Africa does not have citizenship by birth. That doesn't really happen. So it is misleading, information. What we are looking at this particular stage is that if we've got people like Dudula that are going to be picketing, it's their right to picket. But if anybody is prevented or preventing anyone to access schools and do what they're supposed to do, that becomes a criminal offense. And anybody that, therefore, in order to ensure that the BELA Act is properly implemented, what Zandile is advocating for, to actually say we're going to be speaking to principals, is actually, what she's saying is basically that she's going to be breaking the law, and the law needs to take its course. And the issue is that it is not that the identification is not required. Identification is required in terms of, the act, but it merely says that if it happens that the child does not have any identification, they should therefore not be excluded. So I think we need to make that particularly clear that, what is the BELA Act saying in terms of the court judgments and in terms of the Constitution.
Okay.
And therefore in this... Yes.
All right. Dr. Cereseto, I'll bring you. I'm saving you for last, Dr. Elijah Mhlanga, rather, stay with us. But Dr. Cereseto, I'm coming to you. SGBs, what needs to be communicated to them in 2025? What they need to really be thinking about?
Right. It's clearly a problem when we have areas where there isn't sufficient capacity for learners. We cannot have classrooms with 150 in them. And so the Dr. Maluleke, who speaks about that and the need for teachers. That matter has to be resolved. If we've got that number of children, we do have to have the required number of teachers. Now, we know the minister's doing her very best to try and access money from somewhere in order to fund more teachers. So access is important. So I do understand the frustration where access is not possible or the class sizes become unmanageable. That really is a place of tension, and we have to try and deal with the tension. I'm disturbed to hear that schooling is going to be disturbed, because there is another amendment in BELA that also makes anybody who disturbs education also guilty of an offense. And so we have to prioritize education and not disrupt it, and seek means of dealing with what the real frustrations are. And clearly it is parents who can't get their children into schools because the schools are over capacity. Yeah. And that's what's got to be addressed.
Right.
Governing bodies have to follow the law. They have no option but to follow the law, and we have a constitution, and the constitution gives that right to all learners, all children in the country. And it is difficult to manage. And I don't deny that some parents can feel very frustrated about it. But because you're frustrated, we cannot actually go against the law, because in all respects, the law is supposed to be everybody's protection.
Yeah. Okay. Dr. Maluleke is here with us as well, and we'll find out the steps that Sadtu is going to be taking then to capacitate our teachers in our classrooms. So perhaps quite the tall order for you in 2025. We'll get into that on the other side of this short break. Stay with us. Still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition, and we continue with this conversation. Of course, really at the root of it, Operation Dudula is saying that they will be sending their members to various parts of the country, into the schools, to ensure that children of undocumented foreign nationals are not admitted into schools, which, of course, you know, is part of the provisions of the BELA Act, is that all learners are required, or not required, rather, to necessarily produce documentation to be admitted into schools. So essentially, the lack of documentation does not impede on a child's access to education. Dudula taking issue with that matter. And we're speaking to various role players. Jumara's on the line in Johannesburg. We're taking calls. Of course, Jumara is a caller. Jumara, thanks for calling in. What are your thoughts?
A very good evening to you, Naledi, and to your guest, Honorable Maluleke there, and Anthea from governing body, as well as the president of Dudula. So all what I want to say is, hello, Naledi.
Yes, I'm listening to you, Jumara. Go ahead, please.
Yes, okay, yeah. So I'm participating in the SGB. So with the issue of undocumented kids, which are foreigners, it is becoming a major problem in the school. The school that I'm leading, I will tell you that 70% is foreigners, and most of them, I will say 100%, they don't have documents. Even the parents themselves were questioning them. Some documents have expired as far as 2013, and they are still bringing their children to the school. And the other reason is that they are not paying school fees. And our schools, they are now owing a lot of money in Johannesburg, city of Johannesburg, because sometimes they promise us that they can close water, electricity, because we are paying school fees. We are school that need to be having been paid a school fees. In other words, what I'm trying to say, our school is from Model C. Okay. So what is happening now? I want to speak to Anthea of governing body to say that it is better for him and Elijah Mhlanga there to ensure that what they have to do now, they must call Mbizo that will be having SGB of schools, so that they discuss and also to lecture most of the SGB members about the BELA Act, and also Honorable Matlakala, who is also one of the people that they've been voicing this issue, and we are very confused with what is happening in this country in regard of foreigners. There are at least yes.
Yeah, tell me something. Where is the school, Jumara?
Okay, Naledi, to be honest with you, the school is situated in Queen's Road and Empire Road. I think Mr. Mugwena knows me very well as I speak here. That school now is just right close to the the constitutional court. That's where the school is. So we are expressing this. Remember, when you speak about demographics, so most of the children there, they are taking space for the South African kids, which parents they're supposed to be there because they are working close to the school.
Yeah.
So in other words, we are absolutely supporting what Dudula is saying, that they will be going school by school.
All right, Chumalo, thank you so much for calling, and we appreciate it. Let's get into what needs to happen now. Dr. Maluleke, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And there's, I mean, you hear Dudula saying, well, we'll be there. We're going to the schools. She's deployed her members, and they'll be there to stop the admissions of the children of undocumented foreign nationals.
Well, I must say that they have a right to demonstrate. They have a right to go and protest. It is their right to do that. But what must never happen is to blame the teachers and say the teachers must do the things that are unlawful. The teachers are not paying teacher unions for them to be criminals and do criminal work. The teachers are paying their unions to negotiate their condition of employment and making sure that they are supported and so forth. And therefore, this act is not wrong. The act is implementing the court order. Nobody challenged the court orders. Nobody challenged the Constitution of South Africa. So we need to understand and really put things in perspective so that we don't mislead the people out there at the end of the day. So all of us here want education. They want our children to be admitted. And the act or the Constitution has never said that the children of the South Africans will be discriminated against. It does not say that. And again, I need to emphasize, documentation does not mean there must be no identity. There must be something that is identifiable, and then they must be worked together of people who are in the school to ensure that they are able to provide those documents at a later stage when the learner has been admitted. The issue here, it is the court order, is the Constitution, and let's stop blaming one another here and accusing one another here when we are supposed to be addressing the real issues that needs to be addressed. So for me, is that what must happen is that the Department of Home Affairs must work 24 hours to ensure that those that have applied to be documented, they are granted those particular papers for identification, whilst the students are learning at the same time, and they must do that. There must be no delay, because the problem our teachers are facing today is that you admit a learner, after admitting the learner, then the parents disappear. It is not the fault of the learner. It is the irresponsibility of that particular parent, and therefore the school must really open a case against those particular learners according to the Act, because you are failing to support your own child. So that they must then be going to court and then demand that you came here, you said you'll provide the document on this particular time, and then you disappeared. You didn't do that because now we have granted the child that. So that must happen. And therefore, but there must be no violence. We must follow the law. And that's my emphasis, is that support, and the department must give us more resources, to be honest, because the school that Jumara is talking about needs to be able to admit the learners that are going there. And then if the space is not there, the departments must provide, alternate process, spaces for those particular children.
Elijah, you can have the last bite here, and the final thoughts really as we wrap things up, because so much has been addressed and a lot expected from the department. Synergy between the Department of Basic Education and Department of Home Affairs, for instance, that's going to be quite the task for you. And Dudula says they'll be there. What is that going to look like? Dr. Cereseto is concerned that this is going to be a disruption of schooling.
Yeah, thanks, Naledi. Dr. Maluleke and Dr. Cereseto have dealt with that matter in terms of the disruptions and what shouldn't happen. The Department of Basic Education and Home Affairs have long had a protocol agreement which goes back more than 10 years. Through that agreement, we are able to assist learners in school uniform who go to Home Affairs offices for assistance during working hours. And the Department of Home Affairs has been working hard to make sure that all those who present themselves and seek assistance in this regard, they get that particular assistance. What does not happen, though, is a situation which Dr. Maluleke has just spoken to, where parents disappear. Once the child has been admitted, they don't come. You never see them again. They don't even attend meetings. That's why these children end up reaching matric without any form of identification whatsoever. And that, by the way, does affect the way we run the education system, because when it comes to those learners, the system doesn't know what number to allocate to them so that their certificate can be produced with a form of identification. That's why we say to them, please make sure that once you are admitted, parents, please present yourselves to government so that you can get the help that you need. So Dr. Maluleke is correct. Home Affairs must work 24 hours to ensure that those that have applied get assistance. But the parents must also work 24 hours to assist the Department of Basic Education and Home Affairs by coming through to seek assistance, presenting that which they have, so that the lives of their children can be better moved forward, because without any form of identification, you're not going to go anywhere. So we really need the cooperation of everyone for a smooth running of the basic education system.
And finally, before I let you go, Elijah, where are we now with the admissions process for 2025? Are all learners admitted?
So the admission process for the following year starts a year before. So around March, April, and May, that's when the admission process for the following year begins. So the majority of all the learners who applied have been placed. In fact, most provinces do not have any challenges, except in the Western Cape and Gauteng, and some of the major cities in other provinces. Of course, every year we experience a large influx of new applications that are coming to our schools. It will happen on Monday, it will happen on Tuesday, it will also happen on Wednesday when schools open. You find thousands and thousands of parents who come through to our schools without prior notice, which means our schools and district offices are going to have less problems.
And I raised that. I raised apologies. I am out of time, and I see that Zandile of Dudula obviously wanting to comment on that issue, and I raise it because the Gauteng Provincial Education Department extending the operation of their contact center until the 30th to deal with some queries related to online admissions. But it's an issue that we'll get into as we go further into January. Thank you so much for participating in our discussion, and to our guest, Dr Mugwena Maluleke, General Secretary of Sadtu, an absolute pleasure having you in studio with us. Dr Vusumuzi Sibanda of the African Diaspora Global Network, Zandile Dabula, the President of Operation Dudula, Elijah Mhlanga, spokesperson for the Department of Basic Education, and Dr Anthea Cereseto, the National Chief Executive Officer of the Governing Bodies Foundation.